Now then, you're very welcome along to this evening's football show. Later on, we'll chat through a few of the various stories and ongoings with Nathan Murphy, who'll join us after 9:30 or so. But first, John Anderson, former Republic of Ireland player, a Newcastle player, and still very involved on the media side of things, certainly in the Northeast, joins us on the line. Evening, John.
Evening, how are you doing?
Very well. How are things in your neck of the woods?
Lively at the moment. I mean, obviously, everybody's in lockdown, similar to yourselves, but with all the speculation that's going on about this takeover at Newcastle, it's got everybody talking again.
I'm sure it has. We'll get into the takeover in a moment. How are you finding lockdown?
I'm struggling with it now, I have to say, if I'm perfectly honest. I'm running out of things to do. I cut half the grass yesterday, so I could leave half of it for today to do, so for something to do. So it's just trying to find things to do every day. But it's tough going.
Yeah, and are you trying to get out and exercise? Are you allowed to get out and exercise at this stage in your neck of the woods, or what's the word there?
Yeah, I mean we've got plenty of fields around us, so I go for a good old ramble in the morning with the dog, and then take her out again in the evening time. So getting a little bit of exercise, but obviously not as much as I'd like.
Yeah, the dog doesn't know what's hit it.
Oh, it doesn't. No. She sleeps well at night.
So tell us about the takeover then. We're hearing in the region of £300 million. This has been an ongoing story for I don't know how long under Mike Ashley, that he certainly has wanted to sell for a long time. We've heard of various sales and then they've fallen through. This one seems to be a bit more concrete. What do we know?
Yeah, it seems to be a little bit more concrete. Papers have been registered, but we've been here before to a degree. Maybe not so far down the line as this time, but I'm still a little bit sceptical. I've always been sceptical all along about it. Until the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, I would still be sceptical. But we seem to be further down the line. You just never know with Mike Ashley. He could change his mind at any time. He could agree to one thing, and then the following morning or the next 5 minutes or whatever, he could change his mind, and everything could be up in the air again. So we're just going to have to wait and see, I'm afraid.
And is that why it's tended to fall apart in the past? Mike Ashley can change his mind?
Yeah, that seems to be the reason, yeah. You know, I think it depends on which side of the bed he gets out of in the morning. He goes to bed thinking one thing and he wakes up thinking something completely different. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on it, I'm afraid.
The people behind the bid, we have Amanda Stavely. She's part of a finance group. They were involved in the previous bid, PCP Capital Partners. And she also has the Reuben brothers, who I'm reading are the second richest family in the UK. And also Saudi Arabian sovereign money coming as well. That won't go down brilliantly in the area, I wouldn't think. Saudi money coming in and taking over the club?
I think there'll be mixed feelings on it, if I'm perfectly honest. I think the majority of Newcastle fans want Mike Ashley out after 13 years. You know, he came into the football club. He hasn't been forthcoming with funds to bring better quality players to the football club. You know, and I think people have had enough of him. The majority of supporters have had enough of him now. They want to see somebody come in who's got a little bit more ambition, who wants to take the club forward. You know, and as I say, I think there might be a little bit mixed reaction to it, but I think the majority of supporters will be quite happy with it.
The truth is, whether Amnesty International are slamming Saudi Arabia or not, if they're coming in and buying players, most fans won't care. That's the brutal truth, I suspect.
Yeah, look, as long as they move the football club forward and they're prepared to put money into the football club, become more competitive, really, because in the last 2 years, it's something that we haven't been. You know, the funds haven't been there to go and buy players.
And how would you feel, John, as a former player? Would you be uneasy about that type of ownership coming in?
No, I don't think so. I would like to see what they want to bring to the table. You know, I think there's been a lot of talk about it. And look, as I said earlier, Joey, we've got to wait and see whether this deal is going to be done or not. You know, as I said to you, I'm still very sceptical about it all. But I think I would like to see somebody else come in. I think Mike Ashley has had his turn. He's had 13 years where he hasn't done a great deal for the football club. It's stagnated. If anything, gone backwards, really. Now, if the Saudis are prepared to come in, and Amanda Staveley is, what we've been led to believe, is going to be overseeing the running of the club, she will have a hands-on. She'll be hands-on, so she will have a big say in it. So I've got no problem with it at all, if I'm perfectly honest.
How quickly from when Mike Ashley took over in 2007 did his relationship with the fans deteriorate? Because from memory, he was reasonably popular initially, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. When he first came into the football club, he went and he mixed with supporters. He travelled away with supporters, went in the away end with supporters, bought drinks with supporters. But that quickly went downhill.
It's a little bit superficial, all that nonsense, isn't it?
Absolutely. He was seen at away games in a black and white shirt. He was seen holding pints and drinking with the away support and one thing and another. But they copped onto that pretty quickly, to be quite honest, because what they wanted to see more than that, they weren't bothered about him mixing with them. What they wanted to see was him putting his hand in his pocket, looking to bring quality players into the football club, looking to spend money on the infrastructure of the club. And that wasn't forthcoming, and it hasn't been forthcoming ever since, if I'm perfectly honest. And
was he in a position to spend? Like, was the club hemorrhaging money?
The one thing you would say is the club is very self-sufficient. They don't owe anybody money. They're not in debt to anybody. The only person they owe money to is Mike Ashley. So they are self-sufficient. But supporters don't want to hear that. They want to see their team being competitive on the pitch. And it went from one extreme to another. When you think back in the days when you're spending a world record fee on Alan Shearer, spending record fees on most expensive English defender, most expensive right back, most expensive centre back. Those days seem a long, long way away. It took us till last summer to break our transfer record. And that was a fee that was paid for Mike alone. And we went and bought Joe Linton for a supposed fee of £40 million. So, it's taken us that long to get there. So he hasn't been, he's a very, very wealthy man, Mike Ashley. He hasn't got the funds, obviously, that the owners of Manchester City have. But, he's got more money than the likes of the owners of Bournemouth, Southampton. These type of teams have got, but he just wasn't willing to put his hand in his pocket.
So do we know if Ashley has taken money out of the club? Like, has he made money year on year out of the club, or has it just been an asset that he's been looking to sell and he's been trying to keep alive? And from his perspective, keeping the club in the Premier League, is job done because it makes it a more sellable asset. So I know he bought it for maybe all told about 100 million, and he's going to flip it here for 300 million. But in the interim, has he made or has he lost money? Do we know?
I think he's made money. He's made a lot of Sky money, all the Sky money. A lot of people and a lot of supporters, season in, season out, ask where is all the Sky money gone? And he has said that money has gone on the upkeep of the football club, the wages and the upkeep of the stadium and the training ground and one thing and another. But there's been an awful lot of money that's come into the football club that we haven't seen.
Because I did see there were huge losses in the championship year. I mean, they've stabilised since they got back into the Premier League. So, I mean, I hasten to jump to the defence of Mike Ashley, but there definitely have been years where the club has lost huge sums of money.
Yeah, I mean, there's been 2 relegations under his tenure. Fortunately, we've been able to come back straight away at the first time of asking. And on both occasions, they were the only times that he actually spent money in the transfer market, any relative type of money in the transfer market. And that was because he knew that he had to be in the Premier League to make that money.
Yeah.
So he was to give the then managers sufficient funds to make sure that they were going to get out of the Championship at the first time of asking. But then getting back into the Premier League, it went back to same old, not prepared to go and strengthen the squads. In
many ways, Rafa Benitez went public on that policy and hung him out to dry and made it very clear that he was promised money, looking for money, and the bare minimum was being done. But I guess from Ashley's point of view, Rafa was able to do just enough with what he had.
look, Rafa Benitez did a hell of a job. He came in, he was a breath of fresh air. He took the supporters took to him, and he wasn't backed. If he had been backed, it would have been interesting to see what he could have done. But yet again, money wasn't forthcoming. He was promised this and that, and he never got either of them, to be quite honest. And he wasn't, Benitez being the manager that he is. He's been a successful manager majority of places that he's been. He wasn't shy in coming out and making it known that he was made promises, and those promises weren't filled.
Does Ashley still go to the games? Does he turn up at the stadium ever these days?
Now and again. He hasn't been to too many. He goes to he appears at the odd game, and he appears at the odd away game, but he's not a regular. He's not a chairman or an owner that you would see at every home game. He doesn't turn up at every home game. He turns up now and again, but it's not too often.
Right. I presume he knows what reception he'd get.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. That's probably one of the reasons why he stays away. He knows that it's going to be volatile, the reception that he gets when he's about, and when he is at away games, supporters make the feelings well and truly known to him.
So in some respects, when you look at the guy who went in with the fans and drank with them and put on the jersey, he obviously got into this, I'm sure, to make some money, for sure, as well, and to have a nice plaything. But equally, he wanted a touch of the adoration of the fans. He wanted to be popular. He wanted this to be a fun aspect of his life. You don't go in the fans and do all that PR stuff if you don't care what people think. So he, at some point, it must be disappointing to him now to be probably one of the most hated men in Newcastle.
Well, I find it really, really strange that somebody who's made the money out of business that Mike Ashley has made, and he's obviously a very astute businessman to make the money that he's made. When he first bought Newcastle United, the potential was there. He could have made an awful lot of money from the advertising aspect of it, from the commercial aspect of it, through his shops and one thing and another. If he'd have been more forthcoming in spending money, people would have spent an awful lot more money up here in his shops, but that he just didn't seem to see that. For the life of me, I could never understand why, because if he'd have come in and spent the money and been halfway successful and halfway competitive, he would have got rewarded for it. But for whatever reason, I do not know, he wasn't prepared to do that.
And John, you're working in the media up there now and would have your ear close to the ground. Did Ashley ever do any big sit-down interviews or lay out his thoughts or his plans? I don't remember him, certainly of late, doing any great sit-down interview to explain his thinking.
No, he's never ever done anything with the local media. We do all the games, the local BBC. We do home and away. He's never been forthcoming to do anything there. The only time I've ever seen him do anything was he's done a couple of interviews with Sky. But when it comes to the local media and that, he's just not forthcoming at all. Even written press, local written press, he's not forthcoming at all.
And I mean, look, I bring this point up not in some way to, on behalf of poor trodden down journalists, believe me, but it was even symptomatic of the general air of the club that I know from our lads going to the games here on commentary that any kind of hospitality for journalists, there's a bit of food sometimes left out at most Premier League grounds. Even that was all pared back on. Yeah. It was a real, and who gives a crap? No one cares about the food or the journalists, but it was the atmosphere that it created, and it was probably spoke of the overall atmosphere.
Yeah, without a doubt. Not just from a journalist point of view, but from supporters' point of view as well.
Right.
Newcastle United St James's Park was everybody coming to St James's. Always commented on the atmosphere and how great it was and how difficult it was for opposing teams to come. But he just seemed to kill the life of supporters, kill that fire in their belly, so to speak. He took it all away. And you spoke about the media as well. He stopped the tea and the little bit of grub that they used to get. Obviously, when Rafa Benitez came in, all that reappeared. But not just that, as I say, just everything about it. The whole stadium was flat. Used to get a buzz going to games. Used to enjoy going to St James's. Used to go looking forward to enjoying games. And that is all gone. You go now and everything's flat. There's no atmosphere. And they need to get that back. You know, I think, as I say, people have just had enough. They've had 13 years of it. Yeah. And he just seems to have taken all the fire out of supporters.
It's amazing it's been 13 years, because I think even 2 years after he took over, the club was effectively for sale, but they went down into the Championship, and so he wasn't going to sell at a knockdown price. But it's been, like, it feels like forever that Mike Ashley wants to sell situation at Newcastle. I think we've lost you there, John, have we? We have. Okay. Well, I was pretty much done anyway with John Anderson, so we'll catch up with him again when this sale goes through, perhaps. We'll take a very short break, and then we're checking in with Nathan Murphy. Now then, you're welcome back. So apologies on the John Anderson line situation. We'll talk to him again, I'm sure, over the next couple of weeks, especially if that sale goes through, and maybe more depressingly for Newcastle fans if it doesn't. In the meantime, Nathan Murphy is with us. Hello.
How are you?
Very well. That is a very bright top you're wearing.
Oh, well, it's a beautiful day, Joe. So bit of a kick around with the kids. Got my Trinidad and Tobago 2006 World Cup jersey.
Well, naturally.
Naturally. I went to Germany in 2006 supporting Trinidad and Tobago. A friend of mine, Shastri, is from Trinidad. So we, a big gang of us, went off for about a week to Germany. Got a few Trinidad and Tobago matches in. We we sort of stood out as Trinidad and Tobago supporters, as you would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a thoroughly enjoyable time. They didn't play great football. They were sort of the Ireland of that World Cup. They were pretty dull. They were pretty boring. Probably best remembered for the game against England, which I got to say was probably one of the worst atmospheres of any matches I've ever been at, both for fearing for your life and in terms of the quality of football. Peter Crouch scored for England and grabbed the dreadlocks off the Trinidad defender as he was going up for the header.
Right.
It's probably the one thing that stands out.
I'm frantically
But they were great fun.
Trinidad and Tobago World Cup 2006. Well, that's a hell of an idea. Hell of an idea. Was Dwight still playing, yeah?
Dwight was still playing, yeah. Playing in midfield, if I remember correctly.
Ah, for God's sake.
Playing a slightly deeper role. Yeah, they were pretty boring. They lost 2 of their games, drew 1, but the supporters were brilliant, as you can imagine. Getting to a World Cup finals was pretty much the dream for them. So we followed them around Germany for a week, 10 days.
It was their only World Cup, Trinidad and Tobago. That was it, 06. Failed to win any match, eliminated at the group stages. The smallest nation to reach the finals of a World Cup tournament. A feat previously held by Jamaica at the 98 World Cup. This was record-breaking. Shaka Hislop in goal.
Shaka Hislop, yeah. Yeah, they
Kenwyne Jones. Kenwyne Jones.
I was just going to say, Kenwyne Jones was probably the most recognisable player because that was sort of peak Kenwyne Jones sort of time.
Yeah.
And Dwight York, aging at that stage, he was about probably 35.
Yeah,
at that stage, playing in a slightly deeper role. They had a few players at that stage. Carlos Edwards, who ended up at Sunderland as well, possibly in the Roy Keane time, maybe brought there around the same time as Dwight York. Yeah, it was very much Trinidad and Tobago there for the experience. They didn't add a huge amount in a football sense, but I think anyone who was at Germany would have it right up there as one of the great World Cups in terms of organisation. Like the fan zones were just at a completely different level. Every single night. I remember watching the opening night, which I think was the day before Trinidad and Tobago played Sweden in their first match. We were in Dortmund watching it, and Germany were playing obviously on the opening night in a fan zone with about 10,000 German fans. It was just one of the great nights. Could have been Dublin this summer, Joe.
Oh, well, listen. Dwight York was going on 37 that year.
Yeah.
More of a holding midfielder, I would have said.
Yeah, obviously it was a World Cup where it was absolutely roasting, but everything about Trinidad, it was just so slow and ponderous, and there was no great flair to them at all. I thought when we decided we were going to go and we were going to be Trinidadians for 10 days that they were going to live up to that sort of Caribbean style of football, but alas, it really wasn't to be.
That wasn't a particularly good period for England either. English football wasn't very good, really. Especially, I mean, consistently found out at World Cup level, couldn't keep the ball. The fact that Peter Crouch was doing the business for them up front against Trinidad speaks volumes.
It does, but Peter Crouch generally, like his goal-scoring record for England is exceptional. He always got a lot of stick, no matter where he went. But I think he's got a goal every 2 games, at least. In an England jersey. That was sort of coming towards the end of that golden generation. Like they still should have been a lot better than they actually were.
They should have. That was still, persisting with 4 men flat across the midfield and being outplayed by every team they went up against. This was nothing against Peter Crouch, by the way. I'm just not necessarily sure that you're going to win a World Cup with him. I'm trying to see when England went out in 06. Do you remember off the top of your head?
England, I was going to say that was the 2010 was the Frank Lampard.
Yeah, South Africa. It's against
in South Africa. 2006. Dear God, it has gone out of my head.
I'm going to have a look here.
England you do.
World Cup, 2006.
I remember the day we landed in Germany, and we landed into Frankfurt and drove up to Dortmund. But England were playing in Frankfurt the next day, and that was not a city. This was an English crowd you really didn't want to be around.
I have it here. So they got through the group without doing anything too exciting. Yeah. And then I do remember watching this game. This is what I mean about England. They played Ecuador in the last 16. They won 1-0 courtesy of a David Beckham free kick. But it was, it was a really bad performance. They scraped through. They didn't control any of the game. And then quarterfinals, it was against Portugal. Game finished goalless. And then England knocked out in penalties. They've had so many penalty shootouts, I can't even quite remember that. Ricardo saved from Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard and Jamie Carragher. The only England player who converted his penalty was Owen Hargreaves. Portugal won the penalty shootout 3-1, despite missing 2. That was Eriksen's final match as England manager. So I wonder, had Scholes gone at that stage? Maybe he went just after that. Maybe that was the time when Scholes said, me on the left wing, sod that. Like Ericsson and England, 06, they ran out of ideas for sure.
Yeah, and like even the fact that like they had so many penalty shootout defeats at that stage that they're probably the one group who are forgettable for missing their penalty kicks. It was such a flat tournament from an English point of view. So like there's nothing about that tournament from an English point of view that stands out at all.
No,
nothing.
They're very, very forgettable. But the German experience was good. Any stadium stand out from memory?
Dortmund Stadium, even though my memory is that the yellow wall was actually all seated because it was a World Cup. And we were in there for that game. I think it was Trinidad, Sweden was the first one. It was just a level of. I always remember we got off a train in Dortmund Centre, and there was a red carpet at the train station, and the red carpet went straight from the train station to the football stadium. So you knew as long as you were near that red carpet, if you could find that red carpet, and it was about 2 miles away, but there was a red carpet for the full 2 miles. If you could find that red carpet, you knew you would somehow find your way home. In many ways. The sun was shining. It was just the most glorious 10 days. And like the Germans were playing a brilliant style of football that year.
Yeah.
And like they started the tournament so well. And yeah, it was just, I was a good age to be there. Everything about it was just beautiful.
Social distancing. You wouldn't have known what social distancing was.
No, in the square in Dortmund with several thousand Trinidadians and Tobagons, I'm fairly sure is how they describe themselves. Yeah, there wasn't much social distancing, Joe.
No doubt. Well, let's go from the sunshine and the summer of 06 to whatever's going on now. You've been trawling through the various dispatches to give us a sense of what's been going on. Is there much going on? We've just done Newcastle takeover.
The more things change, Joe, the more they stay the same. Paul Pogba and Graham Souness, the main story, it seems.
I saw this. I did wonder how in the midst of no football they'd managed to dominate the headlines, but this has been a big story for the last day or two. What exactly has gone on? I'm not totally au fait with everything.
So Paul Pogba was doing an interview and was obviously asked about the sort of consistent criticism that has come his way from Graham Souness in particular over the last 18 months, particularly over the last 6 months. He hasn't played since, I think, St. Stephen's Day at this stage. And he was asked about Souness. He said, I heard he was a great player and stuff like that. I know the face, but not the name. Like I said, I'm not someone that watches a lot of punditry. I watch a lot of football, but I don't stay after the game to listen to what they're going to say about this and that. I like to focus on the football. So Souness was on Sky, and they're doing this thing on Sky Sports News every morning where they have various different players on with Jamie Carragher and Dave Jones, a sort of Monday night football, but for half an hour in the morning. So Souness was on this morning. So Souness was asked about Paul Pogba and what he had to say. And Souness sort of laughed and joked it off, but did give the line, show me your medals. To which obviously there's been quite the response. Put your medals on the table. Put your medals on the table. The oldest saying in football comes to mind. Put your medals on the table. I've got a big table.
How many medals is a World Cup worth?
Well, this is the thing. So Graham Souness has 3 European Cups. Is 1 World Cup equal to 3 European Cups? Now, Graham Souness was never in a position where he could win a World Cup. So that was nothing he could really do about that. They both won 5 league titles.
Yeah.
Paul Pogba has 5 of them with Juventus. He's got a Europa League medal. He's got a League Cup medal. But I guess that World Cup medal is the one that makes it difficult for Souness to say.
It's a healthy size. It's a very healthy sized table in Pogba's house, I would say, as well.
Yeah, it's something we must do the next time we have Philippe Auclair on, is have a proper conversation about the French view of Paul Pogba, because all we get is just never-ending punditry from what he's done at Manchester United, about his attitude, about how could he be an actual leader for this team. Obviously, a huge amount of it based around spending 90 million on him. He did end up remarkably in the Premier League team of the season last season. Like, it feels as though he's been looked at as a complete busted flush. Like, this year, something has clearly gone horribly wrong with the injury that started out as a couple of weeks, ends up as he hasn't been seen in 6 months. He's played 8 times all season for Manchester United. And Souness clearly has a bee in his bonnet about him, because we even had Souness over at a roadshow about 6 weeks ago. Seems like a lifetime ago at this stage. And Pogba's name seems to come up out of nothing. Even if he's not asked about, his name comes up and Souness' face just changes. So whatever it is about Paul Pogba and his character and the way he handles himself and the way he plays the game, Souness ain't having it.
I think Souness also knows it gets a reaction as well. You know, everybody's playing a bit of a game here. You know, I saw the Souness clip with Carragher in the morning, and in fairness, it wasn't like, you know, Carragher was doing it as a bit of a wind up. You know, he had a long spiel, and it was almost like a joke at Souness's expense. And I saw Carragher retweeting a Daily Mail report on it to say, look, this was a bit of a wind up. It's all been billed as way too serious. The Pogba comments, I hadn't actually heard exactly what he said there. They're a lot more conciliatory than what I read, which was Pogba saying, who is this chump? Basically, it was presented as Pogba saying, I don't even know who this guy is. And actually, when you read out his comments on the podcast, was it? It sounds a bit more honest. And not really that surprising for a mid-20-something French player in the UK. Why would he know who Graham Souness is, really, especially if he's not that bothered watching punditry, which is totally understandable, and not a slight on Graham Souness. So it doesn't sound like Pogba went out to do a hatchet job on Souness there at all.
And why would he watch the punditry? Particularly, I'm sure he's been told by many people exactly the sort of thing that Graham Souness is saying about him. So why do he put himself in a position when he sits down knowing that no matter what happens, he's going to get slated? Maybe it is, I don't want to say it's a silly season, but it's a season when any little comment at all is going to be taken massively out of proportion. Yeah. And even Souness' reaction, when you read the quotes of put your medals on the table, I've got a big table, he was half laughing, though you could tell a little bit of him was,
yeah.
This guy doesn't know me.
It was 90% quip and a bit of a laugh, I thought, when I saw the clip. Because I saw the headlines first, I thought, God, this is a hell of a beef going on between these two. And on your point that you don't want to call this silly season, Nathan Murphy, this is the silliest season of our lives. This is it. You were in it. So, okay, so Pogba Souness, bit of a tiff, but not the massive scrap that you may be reading in the headlines.
No.
Where else are we going then? What do you want to take us
to? Scotland, where it's permanently silly season, it seems, in Scottish football. So, like the rest of the leagues, they're trying to figure out exactly what to do. And they're sort of probably halfway between the League of Ireland and the Premier League in terms of rights and money and finances. So the Scottish League, the authorities basically want to scrap it. They want to end it now and award a title, go at relegation, and be in a position that come the middle of August, they're starting a new season so that the television rights deal will continue as normal, so that they will get whatever money they're due from Sky in August. They will get that. That seems to be their number one priority, is to start next season as planned, even if it means not playing the last 9-10 games. Celtic are all but champions, though Rangers mathematically still have a chance. And I saw their chairman saying, you wouldn't give Usain Bolt a gold medal for finishing on 75 metres. So, which is, fair enough. We could always stumble and fall. But it's turned into an absolute mess. Even trying to follow it over the last few days, none of this made sense. So, basically, the Scottish Premier League and the Scottish authorities have been saying that finance, this is all about money, that they want to give out the prize money and they want to be in a position to lend money to teams to get them through until the start of next season when it all kicks off again. To do this and to be able to stop the season now, they put it to a vote of the clubs. And the way it was going to work, they needed 75% of clubs to vote yes, but it had to be 75% in the top flight, 75% in the championship, and 75% in Leagues 1 and 2. So if everybody in League 1 and 2 said yes, but 50% of the top flight said no, this wasn't going to go ahead.
Okay.
There was all sorts of rumour and innuendos to pressure that was being put on behind the scenes. It didn't really at first kick off into a massive Rangers-Celtic thing, surprisingly. Rangers were somewhat quiet about it. They were frustrated and annoyed, but weren't one of the more outraged. Hearts in particular, who were going to be relegated potentially by this, were one of the outraged. So the voting started and votes had to be in, it seemed, by 5 o'clock on Friday. And this is where the confusion starts, because it turned out votes didn't have to be in. They'd asked for them to be in by 5 o'clock on Friday, but obviously the constitution of the league suggested it didn't have to be in for 28 days. So there were votes missing. But bizarrely, the Scottish football authorities released the vote with 3 votes missing. And it turned out one vote was going to be absolutely crucial, because while the top flight and the bottom 2 divisions had both voted yes, the championship, which is the second tier in Scotland, needed one more yes vote for the season to be stalled right now. So there were 3 teams left, Dundee, Partick Thistle and Inverness. They'd agreed to vote as a group. They agreed to vote no, which would have meant this wouldn't have gone ahead. But at the very last minute, Dundee, after sending in their vote, it seems, said, hold on, send that back to us. The Scottish League seemed to be somewhat confused about whether it actually arrived. And despite agreeing with Partick Thistle and Inverness to vote no, Dundee said, actually, we haven't decided. We want more time. So the whole thing ended up resting over the weekend on what Dundee were going to do. And then this evening, Dundee have had a complete U-turn and said, we're going to vote yes, which means that the Championship League 1 and League 2 are finished right now. There will be no more football in those leagues for the rest of the season. They're going to give the Premiership a chance, but they're not expecting any football, which means Celtic will be crowned champions, Hearts will be relegated, Dundee United winners of the Championship. And this has caused absolute outrage in Scottish football, even though it may well save a lot of clubs, because the Scottish board, it's a 9-man Scottish board, but it turns out that there were 3 clubs represented on the board who would massively benefit from a yes vote. Motherwell, who are going to finish 3rd in the Premiership and the European place that comes with that. Hamilton, who are guaranteed safety, and Brecon, who are going to be spared a relegation playoff. They're bottom of League 2 in Scotland and going to be spared a relegation playoff. So Rangers have called for an investigation. They've called for resignations of all the senior people in Scottish football, because the question is, what sort of pressure was put on Dundee to get them to go through this U-turn? Either way, it seems there's going to be no football played at all in Scotland for the remainder of this season. They will start afresh potentially in August, but God knows when. And now they somehow need to go through a legal minefield of, can Hearts be relegated? Can clubs be relegated and promoted? Do they need to redefine the entire season? It's a sort of typically Scottish football mess.
Not since Kevin Kilbane described the Nations League have I been this
I was
confused.
thinking that halfway through.
I have no idea what you just said. For the last 3 minutes, I just can't even. So sorry, what's happening? In short, I get the Dundee thing. I got that much. They're going to court. Is that basically where we are here? This thing is going to go legal.
I wouldn't be surprised. Well, already you've Rangers calling for the resignation of all the senior people who are running Scottish football.
Right.
So it's what happened from Dundee agreeing with Partick Thistle and Inverness to vote no.
Yeah.
That somehow their no vote never arrived in the offices of Scottish football.
Was it
somehow
by fax or what?
It got lost. No, the email, it seems, maybe it got blocked by,
okay.
It was a dodgy email address.
Spam.
Who knows? But it seems it didn't arrive. And what they did was they made it very public that Dundee, it was all going to come down to Dundee and how Dundee would vote. So that's what they were at now, Wednesday. That's 3-4 days ago. So you can imagine the pressure Dundee have been under over the last 3 or 4 days to change their mind. And they have changed their mind.
Right. Well, we'll do an hour special on that on tomorrow's show.
People ask why we don't cover Scottish football more.
Jeez. Because, I mean, the headlines are so sexy, and yet, I mean, by the end of your explanation, I just never want to hear about this again.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting story until I started reading more and more and more and more.
Okay. So, well, you manfully put in the research hours, and we commend that. Because with the Nations League, Kilbane just did it on the fly and realised halfway through he didn't know what he was talking about.
He basically ruined the Nations League for everybody forever, because half the country still think, it's a load of nonsense. Kevin Kilbane told me.
Correct. So the Italians then, just before we wrap things up, they're coming up with a plan to start testing players. Is it at the beginning of next month?
Yeah, the beginning of May. So they're still not planning to have the league back until June at the earliest. But obviously we're hearing a lot about teams maybe going into some form of self-imposed quarantine for several weeks and potentially even longer, so that they can get games back being played behind closed doors. And Italian football is going to start this, it seems, right at the beginning of May. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because it's one of the things that comes up again and again with the Premier League. There's such a lack of testing in England right now. I know they've ramped it up massively in Italy, but can you be putting footballers to the front of the queue for testing who are generally incredibly fit and healthy young men, where there shouldn't be any issue for them, and you have at the moment frontline staff who can't even get tested in England? But it seems Italy, like all these other countries, they want to get football, they want to get some form of sport back up and running, maybe even just for that sense of normality. So it looks as though, remarkably considering everything we've read and watched and the horrors have gone on in Italy over the last few weeks, that after the Bundesliga, they're going to be one of the first leagues potentially back.
I'm not shocked to hear it, because by all accounts, lockdown fatigue in Italy is really beginning to tear at the social fabric, and maybe some kind of football in May, albeit acknowledging the moral question of prioritising young, fit, healthy sports people for testing, may just be what people want, and they're desperate enough to allow it, because you're probably only talking about what? 20 players per squad, 400 people, 400 tests. It's not really going to tilt the system one way or another, and might actually provide for the masses of an afternoon if millions can sit down and watch a match. I don't know. I mean, I can see a certain logic in it.
Well, that is the logic of the Premier League. That was the logic a month ago when all this was kicking off, as to the Premier League coming back one game a day, or maybe 2-3 games a day even, for the space of 3 or 4 weeks, that it would be possibly on free-to-air television, that it would be a form of entertainment, as you say, when this lockdown fatigue really kicks in, that it will give people a reason to stay inside more. And that, while they're not obviously frontline workers, that there will be a real role for football and sport within that there will be a hugely positive social benefit for it happening. It just feels like there's, particularly in England, there's so many hurdles they have to get to before they get anywhere near that. Yeah,
it's hard to make the argument too strongly, but interesting anyway. So that's potentially happening at the beginning of May. I see in your background there, you have the Off the Ball website open, and it looks to me like you're ranking the top 10 goals by Irish players in the Premier League. What about, I'm seeing a picture of John O'Shea, presumably that's the Arsenal one.
Yes.
I'm seeing a picture of Robbie Keane, not as clear cut to me. And I can't see who the Villa player behind your head is. Stan.
Steve Staunton. Stan could have potentially had a couple in there. He only has the one, which is the goal against Manchester United, which, when you actually watch back, I ended up watching about 20 minutes of Villa Manchester United. This was a bit of a title decider, first year of the Premier League, March 93. They're top two teams in the table, and you Paul McGrath and Steve Staunton, who were possibly the two best players on the pitch. Villa, absolutely brilliant, and they end up drawing the game 1-1, and they pretty much collapsed. But Steve Staunton scored the opening goal in that game. I think he ended up coming 5th in my list in the end. It's one of these things I started and I massively regretted starting, because where does it end? And what exactly are you judging upon? Like, context is huge. I was very tempted to put in, say, Stephen Hunt's goal for Wolves, which kept them up, which was this brilliant finish, curled finish, top corner, last minute of the season almost. And because of what it was worth, it's probably better and more important than some of the others. But Robbie Keane gets in twice. The Liverpool goal is in there.
Against Arsenal.
Yeah. And he also actually comes top of the list. I don't want to ruin the whole thing.
Does he come top of the list? Did Stephen Carr's Thunderbolt make it in?
It did. Stephen Carr's Thunderbolt did make it in. Yeah,
I always find it hard to know how highly to prioritise just a beautiful strike from outside the area. Because on the one hand, stunningly eye-catching moment for everyone, incredible. And on the other hand, it's just a bit of a, just to give it a smash and see what happens, kind of an aspect to those goals.
Yeah, that was a big part of my thinking, is that anybody in a way could score.
Yeah.
There's a bit of a pot shot element to it.
Totally, yeah.
It's not like they're doing this week in, week out, which is why the goal I went for, which was Robbie Keane against Blackburn, which you may remember was a throw-in over in the right-hand corner, taken quickly to Keane. He just dinks it over Robbie Savage's head.
Oh, against Leicester.
Controls it brilliantly. Yeah. It was against when Robbie Savage was at Blackburn. He's at the end line, dinks back inside on his left foot and volleys it in to the bottom corner. It was just Keane at his peak.
He was on with Gary Neville on Gary Neville's Soccer Box, and I think he picked that out as pretty much his favourite goal, or close to it, for all those reasons. Like the movement, the ingenuity, just like the little devil-may-care street footballer. There's a touch of Suarez about that, the way he'll manipulate things and create something out of nothing. So he loves that goal as well.
Yeah, and it was the one that you look at and go, Robbie Keane's probably the only player on the list who could have scored that goal. Yeah. Like Damien Duff, funny, going through a lot of Duff's Premier League goals, they're almost just carbon copies of each other. He doesn't have one maybe standout goal like that. Like some of the other ones that are up there, Stephen Reid's goal, again, it's one of those absolute rockets.
Is this the ball breaks to him edge of the area? Like he's a good bit back, and it's the fastest. And I don't know what it was clocked at, but it feels like the fastest.
186 kilometres per hour.
Yeah.
Stephen Ireland, a last-minute volley, you might remember it, against Reading. Acrobatic volley, ball sort of almost up at chest height. He's just on the edge of the D, smashes it in top corner.
Don't remember as fondly or as well, but go on, keep hitting me with some others.
Who else had I in there? Jeff Hendrick, 2-3 years ago, scored a brilliant volley.
Yeah.
Class control. Straight in, top corner.
Yeah.
The ones that I found difficult were, like Shane Long, you might remember, scored a goal where, like, this close control, the ball came over his shoulder from about 50 yards back, and he just took it down to perfection, rounds a couple of defenders. You're like, again, it's the sort of thing that, not many players could actually score. I threw in a free kick.
Dennis Irwin, I hope.
No. Ian Hart leads against Manchester United.
Yeah,
30 yards out, left-footed. I pretty much ran through the list. O'Shea was an interesting one. Like, where do you put in John O'Shea? Because it's one of the greatest Premier League games of all time.
Yeah.
Like, it's the tunnel game.
Yeah.
And there's John O'Shea with the classiest finish.
The most shocked face after a finish. A part of me, so if I'm trying to think of United goals for Dennis and Roy, like one that feels iconic, partly in a way because Eric Cantona said it was his favourite goal, is the assist for Dennis Irwin. And it's just vintage Irwin off the left-hand side, plays a 1-2 with Cantona, who, stabs a little pass over the top on the return for Irwin, and he just finishes brilliantly. And it's just like this phenomenal left-back who is so unassuming, and it's such a great goal. I kind of want Dennis to get in there for those reasons. He's had a few free kicks as well.
That's kind of a separate list in that it's a very individualistic thing, these sort of goals. It's just the strike. Whereas, I think Damien Duff would feature 3 or 4 times if you're being on the end of unbelievable team goals.
Yeah.
Like some of the goals he scored when he was with Chelsea. Like the goal even in the Champions League he scored against Barcelona.
How many hours work was this? How did you find all these goals? Did you have to just go by memory?
I had a good few of them in my head.
Yeah.
And then, just a lot of Googling and searching. And there's probably some brilliant goals I've forgotten about that I've already started to be reminded of them, as you can imagine, in the most polite manner.
Yes, I'm sure. Nathan, sorry, I just wanted to politely let you know via the medium of Twitter that you may have overlooked this goal.
The first response I got was about a Seamus Coleman goal, which was, granted, a very, very good goal, and was a very angry response to the entire list was a sham, and then did the obvious thing, clicked in, Everton supporter.
It was a sham. The whole thing
Anyways,
is a sham.
It'll pass a few minutes still.
The whole sham is available at offtheball.com.
Yes, you got it.
Tomorrow evening, a man who doesn't care what the Twitterati think about his choices. He knows his stuff, and it's that simple. John Giles has been picking his all-time 11s. He has done Manchester United, Liverpool, and was it Spurs?
Yes, a lot of debate about Spurs last week.
What was the most controversial? I saw Liverpool and United, and really enjoyable. I'll catch up on Spurs. I wouldn't have as strong opinion on Spurs, I dare say. Was there a big controversy in the Spurs choices?
So part of the problem is Spurs have had a lot of very gifted technical players over probably the last 25 years, but very little success.
Yeah.
So there was no Gascoigne.
There was no Hoddle either, was there?
No Hoddle.
Yeah. Was Waddle in?
No Waddle.
No Waddle.
No Hoddle, no Waddle. Hoddle was in.
Hoddle was in. Waddle wasn't.
Hoddle was in.
Okay.
But still had question marks about Hoddle.
Yeah, I read that headline.
Didn't have the pace really needed to do at the very top level, so that when he went up against better opposition, didn't have that turn that you needed.
Yeah.
Against the very best.
I tell you who I know was in. Greavesy.
Oh, first name. First name.
Greavesy was in first. Is Harry Kane alongside him?
Harry Kane's in, yeah.
Is Luka Modric in?
Luka Modric is not in.
That would have hurt John.
Again,
John wouldn't like that. Who's his midfield? Who is his midfield too?
His midfield. Oh God, you put me on the spot now.
Dave Mackay.
Dave Mackay, the
Hoddle.
best midfielder he's seen. Dave Mackay, Glenn Hoddle, Gareth Bale didn't get in.
Yeah.
Chris Hughton was his left back. Who was the third? Oh, it's a real obvious one. God, I'm going to be frustrated about this. You're looking at JP, who's probably just looking back. What are we talking about?
No, he's just laughing at your discomfort. Well, people can check it at offtheball.com or listen to the podcast.
Don't ruin the whole thing.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, listen to the podcast. So tomorrow, this is the point I was trying to make.
Danny Blanchflower.
Danny Blanchflower. There you go. I could have guessed that.
How could I?
Tomorrow it's Arsenal.
Yes.
So
I was talking to John earlier. I'm not going to give away any hints, but
can I pick out some definites?
Go on.
Chippy. Thierry Henry, and he will say Ray.
Really good Irish representation on every team so far.
Well, I think a bit of bias is understandable, isn't it?
Well, I think they pretty much all deserve to be there.
Okay. So, Jennings over Seaman, it must be. Jennings.
I'm not giving it away.
Yeah, sure. No, I'm just trying to lay out my team here. I'm trying to think of the back four. I'd say Adams has to be in there.
I'd mentioned Bob Wilson as Bob had one good season, it turns out.
See, this is the brilliance of Giles. Do you know what I mean? He can just actually tell you the reality of the situation. I was like, Bob, if anyone said to us Bob Wilson, we'd be saying, what a legend. Longevity, of course. So Henri's in. Oh, that's a tough team. Vieira, Petit, Overmars, all that great team. Okay.
Well, that's the thing. It's hard to get out of my head of how you can escape a midfield four of Pires, Overmars, Petit, and Vieira. But where's Liam Brady?
Well, he's in the team. I know that much.
So.
And does Sol Campbell? I'm interested. Does Sol Campbell force his way into that back four? Does Dave O'Leary?
Well, they got O'Leary, Tony Adams.
Yeah.
Sol Campbell.
It's very competitive.
What about left back? Nigel Winterburn, Ashley Cole.
It has to be Ashley Cole, surely. Right, that's on tomorrow, 7:30. So, Nathan Murphy, that is us done. Thank you for this evening. There are texts flying in to say, can we do more on the Scottish situation on tomorrow's show? So I'll leave that with you.
Yeah. We're going to do an entire football show. We might get Kilban on to explain it in a bit more depth.
It's perfect. It's the perfect marriage. Right, thanks, Emil. We have Lee Westwood on Golf Weekly tomorrow, golf fans. Let's just say that and sign off on that point. Nathan, thanks, Emil.
Cheers, Joe.